magic formula to be adopted by one or two powers. Genuine peace must be the product of many nations, the sum of many acts. It must be dynamic, not static, changing to meet the challenge of each new generation. For peace is a process, a way of solving problems. With such a peace, there will still be quarrels and conflicting interests, as there are within families and nations. World peace, like community peace, does not require that each man love his neighbor. It requires only that they live together in mutual tolerance, submitting their disputes to a just and peaceful settlement.
I need somebody who can shape an axe handle from a persimmon sprout, shoe a horse with a hunk of car tire, who can make harness out of hay, wire, feed sacks, and shoe scraps, who planting time and harvest season will finish his 40-hour week by Tuesday noon, and then pain in from tractor back, put in another 72 hours. So God made a farmer.
I stand before you as a friend and ally to every American seeking justice and peace. And I stand before you in firm opposition to anyone exploiting this tragedy to loot, rob, attack, and menace. Healing, not hatred, justice, not chaos, are the mission at hand.
Coming to you live. It's Reba Live on Red State Radio.
Good morning. Today we're going to be looking at a situation that's been going on for many years at Fort Hood down in Texas. We have with us an expert about these things, the criminality that's taking place. Let's welcome Jennifer Norris. Hi, Jennifer. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you, Reba. I appreciate you having me on the show.
Absolutely. So share with the people what you've been up to for the last few years and what you have found in your research.
Well, it started around the time that I retired from the military. I was medically retired for post-traumatic stress because I was a victim of crime while serving. So when I lost my career earlier than expected because of the circumstances, I just thought that that wasn't fair, and I decided to put my master's degree to work to take a look at the issues in the military with military justice and crime. So I was taking a look at things overseas because I noticed a trend in the amount of non-combat deaths of both females and males early on when I started the research, and just decided that I was going to see what the common denominator was. So, for example, while they were over in Iraq, what base were they assigned to? And there was a number of bases that came up over and over, but Fort Hood was definitely on the top of the list. And so I decided, all right, let's go back to the States and see what's going on with those bases and, you know, what the crime looks like on and around the communities near that base. And that's when I noticed that there was a really high cluster of deaths in 2016 of Fort Hood soldiers, and it caught my attention. So started looking into it a little bit further and decided to start, you know, honoring each soldier that died there on my website as best I could as I found out about them. And that's when I realized that the issue was a little bit deeper than what I ever imagined, and military families started contacting me and telling me some of the specifics of what's going on. And that's how we came to where we are today. I was so concerned in the fall of 2017 that I went to Washington, D.C. to speak to lawmakers about the number of deaths that I had witnessed over the course of 2016 and 2017, in addition to the history of tragedies that had occurred at that base over the course of, you know, many years since 9/11. And basically had to go to D.C. and just, like, make them aware of the situation.
Mm-hmm.
And, asked for their help to kind of deal with what was going on, like try to find out why so many soldiers were either, were dying of training accidents or over and over, like the same mistakes, and then like why there was so many suicides at that particular base. And over and over throughout the years, as I've shared the information, I've had a lot of people say, well, it's the biggest base. Well, actually, it's not the biggest base. Fort Bragg is double the size of Fort Hood, yet Fort Hood's issues are twice that of any other base in the United States and worldwide. So there was definitely something going on specifically with Fort Hood that made me kind of key into, all right, I want to take a look at what's going on here and see if we can't do something about it, and use this as the model for the other bases where, because they're basically all symbolic. The Fort Hood is symbolic of the rest of the bases, yet it is the worst. So that's why I honed in on that specific base, because we had inside information from families of which to learn valuable data from to determine kind of what was going on big picture. And so you could take that information, apply it to any base, and then come up with some sort of prevention strategies or whatever it might be to save lives, as opposed to let something get so bad in the military that a person feels like they have to take their own life to escape. When we can fix that with an easy fix, whether it be getting them off the base where they don't feel safe or whatever the cause might be, or getting them out of the military if that allows them to move on with a life that they deserve at 18 years old.
Agreed. So
that's kind of where we got today.
Why do you think it's so prevalent at Fort Hood? Do you think it has something to do with being at the border with Mexico, being so close there?
When I heard that theory recently, I definitely think there's more to that we should look into. We shouldn't discount that theory. And I think another element of it is that it's isolated geographically. And so if it wasn't for Fort Hood being the economic powerhouse that it is, then that the town of Killeen would cease to be. And from what I understand, just in a recent article by Stars and Stripes, who looked further into it, they basically were able to confirm that the 140 plus deaths that I had tracked in the last plus years was actually 165. It's now up to 167.
Wow.
And so that was really helpful, because they were able to shine a light on the fact that Fort Hood stopped doing the press releases of the death of soldiers in an effort to what looks like hide things, as opposed to being transparent with the community and letting them know that there's something deeper going on at that base. I don't think every single case is attached necessarily to Mexican cartel or problems at the border. I think there's some individual issues in there too, with some different things that we need to explore, but that's what a professional investigator could do if they went in there and looked at things big picture, is actually go back and speak with the folks who had contacted me and said, I don't think that my soldier, my spouse, my son died by suicide based on A, B, and C. And people are really quick to just say, oh, well, they just can't accept that their loved one died by suicide. Well, when they're giving you reports that contradict themselves, and they share them with you, you can see why they in fact doubt the label that the military gave that particular death. And when you look at it big picture and you see the same kinds of deaths happening over and over, some of them barbaric, that actually does kind of tie in with the MO of, a gang or a cartel or whatever you want to call it. So that's why I don't want to write that theory off, and it's something that I'd like to investigate further, because there's something bigger going on.
Yeah, it reminds me, really,
I don't have...
Jen, what we have going on with the child sex trafficking. so many times these children are disappearing out of foster care. They're in the care of CPS, and they categorize them as runaways. But, some of them might be runaways, but what are they running from? That's what I'd like to know. And so we have all these children who grow up and they get out of these situations, and they've come forward and shared with us the horror that they have been put through. And I think it's similar to what we're seeing with our military and these young people, oftentimes 17, 18-year-olds that get in this situation and they don't know quite how to handle it. We really need to set up some kind of support mechanism and an emergency out, as you mentioned, so that they can move on with their lives. These people have dedicated themselves to service to their country. And I've talked to many of these soldiers, and I have high regard for them, these people who are serving in our military. But they get into the service, and they really have basically no rights. I mean, they have someone else running every minute of their day. I don't think we thank them enough for what they have given up. And when they find themselves in a situation where they're being abused and manipulated and used, we need to be there with some kind of safety net to ensure their escape in a safe and efficient manner so that they can go home to their families.
Exactly. And we're not going to be able to solve this if we don't reach out to the families and we don't reach out to those that want to report, because if you're not going to report if you're going to be stuck on the same base as the person that you're reporting, especially in that scenario, which is why I think it continues to spiral out of control, and this year's been such a deadly year as far as homicide is concerned, is because nobody wants to report for good reason. And then when Vanessa Guillen ended up dying, after being missing for a couple months, and we found out how and why, it was confirmation of what we already knew, that reporting crime in the military is a motive for homicide. And who would want to report someone you're going to be stuck with that can taunt you, bully you, haze you, or do whatever they want, because they might even be in your chain of command? You're not going to get this solved. So these efforts for the Army or Fort Hood to investigate themselves are fruitless, if you ask me, because they're not reaching out to the people who count, the people that have reached out to me, the families specifically who have said there's something wrong with this investigation. The devil is in the details. And if you read through these reports, you can see why they'd be concerned. So in addition to the crime that we know about, there's a cluster of deaths, 71 or 72 to be exact, at Fort Hood in the last 5 years that have been determined to be deaths ruled by suicide. Well, I think it's just as important to find out why we believe that person may have died by suicide, because that will help us get to the crux of, A, what the issue is. Were they a victim of crime? Were they a witness to crime? Was there some other reason, that we don't know about that might explain why they did this? And then base our policy on what we learn from those kinds of investigations, instead of simply writing them off as, oh, well, that's a death by suicide, and as if it's almost like a victim-blaming thing, like they don't count, when in fact they do. Because if you can't escape the dangerous situation that you might be in, and you feel like the only way out is to die by suicide, that's problematic, and it's directly related back to crime. And I know myself that it can drive you to those levels, because after I reported, I did experience retaliation from the perpetrator's friends, because I reported these people for sexual assault to escape getting raped. And so I understand how fearful it can be to take a stand for yourself, and when sometimes you're forced to, in order to prevent either being raped or killed. And so the military needs to take the expedited victims transfer policy way more serious than they do, and stop minimizing the danger that people are in when they report people for violent crimes. One of the number one motives is financial motive. So when you think about the people that you want to report that are higher up in the chain of command, they're basically protecting their retirements, which are millions of dollars that they're sitting on and trying to protect. So when they say, oh, well, you made that guy lose his career, it's not about his career. It's about the big pile of cash they're going to get when they retire that you're not going to take from them, no matter what. And that's what people need to realize, is that in addition to being in danger, you're stuck with your perpetrator.
Yeah, we not only see this type of corruption going on in the military, but in our federal government, in the local government, in our corporations, where we have people, and even our educational institutions that many times people look at with very high regard, but yet they're doing so much things that are shady. And it's all based on the money. You know, if we follow the money, we'll uncover all kinds of fraud and corruption. And this is what I have been targeting for a good many years of my life, is following the money to see what the real truth is. Now, a couple of weeks ago when I was talking with you, I was actually in the middle of an interview with Vice TV, and they published part of that in a video piece, and that was on a Thursday, and on Monday they removed the commander. It was announced they removed the commander from Fort Hood, and I noticed yesterday it was announced that Congress is now launching a Fort Hood probe after more than 24 deaths this year. So hopefully we're getting some traction here, Jen, and waking some people up that maybe they'll start investigating and actually bring some of these people to justice, get to the bottom of this problem.
That would be ideal. And if people start reaching out to these congressional members who are planning on doing this investigation, one by one, they can start seeing what I see when you look at it big picture, that there's a lot of different elements that are going on at the same time. So it's going to be a multifaceted approach that you're going to have to use to address these issues. You can't just simply say, oh, well, zero tolerance, and here's another sexual assault training course that I want you to sit through. It's going to take a whole lot more than that. It's going to take looking at the mental health piece, which actually there's a bill out there called the Brandon Act, and because Brandon Caserta felt like he was pushed to suicide by leadership who was hazing and bullying him for no reason, there was no reason for it whatsoever, but he decided that he couldn't take it anymore, and he asked his parents as his final wish to, you know, Mom and Dad, will you please change the system so that others who are in my position are able to at least get help for what, you know, whoever is doing to them, whether it be in your chain of command or your peers. You should be able to get mental health to help you deal with what we experience, you know, referred to as retaliation. It's detrimental to your mental health. It's almost like being in a domestic violence relationship that, you know, you'll often hear women talk about how they can't leave because they're financially dependent on their abuser, and leaving would take, you know, a lot of work. It's the same thing in the military. We can't leave. We're forced to stay in the situation, whether we're financially dependent or we don't want to face federal AWOL charges, you know, so that emotional abuse beats you down over time. And, you know, I'm not saying that we need a kinder, softer, gentler military, as if we're not, you know, the badasses that we are, and, you know, we can't accomplish our missions. Obviously, we're really good at what we do. But the thing is people shouldn't have to choose death over getting the help that they need to protect the lives that they deserve to live as an 18-year-old or a 21-year-old or even a 40-year-old man or woman. So there's some simple fixes that we could actually implement to save these people's lives, and why Congress, who's known for decades that we've had suicide issues and everything else, and they still haven't found an appropriate fix to help save the young lives of these men and women, is beyond me. But I'm getting tired of it, and that's why I appreciate being on your show today to talk about the truth, about what we really need from Americans, which is a bug-out plan for these folks that shouldn't have to choose death as a way to escape their situation.
That's
they should
right.
have an out, whether it be the Brandon Act to get mental health, or they just let them out of the military. Get them out if you don't want them there. Don't treat them like crap until they die.
Several months ago, I spoke with a member of the Trump family, Laura Trump, and I gave her some information. I have a colleague in Tampa who actually has done some research and has found ways to help lower dramatically the rates of suicide in our military. He's a veteran himself, a Navy SEAL. And they've never contacted him. It's been really disturbing to me that somebody in the administration is actually blocking these things that could help our veterans. You know, we really have to pull together and keep pushing forward. And I'm going to keep trying to get the information through because we do need to help our veterans in any way that we possibly can. Another point that I want to make sure people understand, this abuse situation is not just involving women. There are also men in the military who are being abused, like Sergeant Elder Fernandez, who recently was found hanging from a tree. And, he was sexually abused. Why are these things happening and no one who is above them taking steps to ensure their safety? As you've noted, a lot of times it is their commander who is the abuser, and maybe we need to set up some kind of an outside reporting system where when these soldiers are on a base or even overseas in a combat situation, they need to have a safe way to report these things without going through their up the chain of command, if you will. So what kind of ideas do you have, or do you have any, Jen, about setting something like that up?
Well, we got to come at it from the mental health angle. We've got to come at it from the expedited victims transfer angle. And then we have to come at it from the, like you said, the third reporting party angle. Because if your chain of command fails you, like in the case of Kamisha Block, which we'll talk a little bit more about here in a few, but just to give you a little overview, she was sent to Iraq with her unit, and her abuser, which they knew he was her abuser, and in her chain of command was sent over to Iraq with her and put in charge of her. And he ended up executing her, shot her 5 times because she was trying to put boundaries up and say, I don't want to be with you. I don't want this with you. So, a typical motive that we see in other domestic violence situations, if I can't have you, no one will, kind of event occurred in Iraq. And again, she shouldn't have had to have chosen death because her chain of command wouldn't help her. They failed her when they put him in charge, knowing that he had already abused her. She had already complained that she didn't want to be around him anymore and had asked for a protection order, and they completely ignored it, and she ended up dead. So it's just like the mental health issue. Why should Kamisha have no other choice but death in that situation because her chain of command failed her? Yes, we need a third-party reporting system for someone, especially overseas, when the only people you have around you are your chain of command, and you're depending on them for your life, not only in the battlefield, but with your own personnel. There is no 911 overseas. So why they haven't had this conversation, despite passing or lifting the Women in Combat ban in 2013, still, this many years later, they still haven't given us a definitive plan of how they're going to protect someone who feels like their life is in danger overseas, not from the enemy, but from the enemy within. And Elder is another perfect example of the issues that we're dealing with stateside. Same thing. At least, stateside, he's not, there are some other options, I mean, it's still just as bad as far as reporting goes, because the reporting structure doesn't change. They still want you to report to the chain of command, and that's what's prohibiting people from reporting is they don't trust the chain of command or whatever their reasoning might be, or the perpetrators in the chain of command, so that's confusing. And the military beats it into your head that you better report through the chain of command. So if they can't use that option, and then they're faced with, okay, I can't escape this guy, and then they are sexually assaulted or abused, and then want it to stop, you see how they're trapped? Whether they're overseas or they're here in the States, they're trapped because they can't just say, well, I quit the Army because my supervisor's abusing me. They got to go back to work the next day and work with that guy.
Yeah,
and that's not right. We need a bug-out plan there, too.
Yes, we do. And I know that you and I have also discussed an early warning type of system that needs to be set up on these bases. And I'm currently working on that, and we're going to discuss that some more here in a little bit. We're going to be joined at the half hour with Shonta, who you're very familiar with. You were just speaking about her sister, and she's going to tell us personally how this has affected her and her family, what happened to her sister, and the deception and the cover-up that has occurred there. And this was 13 years ago, and she still has not received justice. We'll be back in just a few moments. And we're back with Reba Live. Shonta, do I have you here on the line with us? Hello, Shonta? Maybe she'll be with us in a moment. So, Jen, we can just continue our conversation.
It sounds good. I'll give you a little overview of what Shonta's family's been looking for, because I have been working with her for a while. Her situation is very interesting. Like you said, it's been 13, 14 years now that they've been looking for justice. After Kamisha was murdered by her supervisor, the military told the family that her death was ruled a friendly fire incident. And it wasn't until the family recognized at the funeral home that Kamisha had been shot in the head, that they were like, wait, what happened here? This is definitely not friendly fire.
Hello, is this Shonta?
Search for justice began.
Hello?
Shonta?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Jen, we've just been joined by Shonta. Shonta, we've just been discussing a little bit about what's been going on at Fort Hood and other bases around the world. And thank you for joining us here today. And please tell us what you have experienced, what has happened to your own family.
Well, I'll just start at the beginning. My sister had called about a week prior to her being killed, and she said, nobody will help me. And she was very upset on the phone, like you could hear the shaking in her voice. And I said, there's no church you can go to or anything. She said, Shonta, I'm in Iraq. There's nowhere to go. And she never told me what it was about. And then about a week later, it was the day before my birthday. And she had called me, and she said, happy birthday. And I said, it's not till tomorrow. She said, well, in Iraq, it's, the 17th. And I said, well, thank you. I said, would you like to see your nephew for the first time? So I had set him in my lap. And she had seen, her nephew for the first time. And I had seen Brandon's face, her killer, in the camera. But I didn't think nothing of it. You know, I was packing a diaper bag. I was fixing to bring my child to my mom's because I was going to celebrate my birthday. And I get to my mom's. I could have been gone about an hour. And I leave, and 2 service members are driving down the road. And I just freak out, and I get back to my mom's house, and they get out, and they see my sister shot once to the chest by friendly fire. And it took 5 days to get her body home. They said it was flown to Washington to be dressed and then home. And when we opened the casket, my sister had a bullet hole in her head. She had fake hair on her head. They glued a bun on her head. Her hair was to her chin. I turned around and I looked at my mom and I said, Mom, she's been shot in the head. She said, I know, Shonta, nobody comes in this room. We have to get home. We got to get on the phone and we got to get answers. So my mom calls the casualty assistance officer and she says, I want to know what happened to my daughter. I want to know who killed her and I want to know what happened. So the lady calls back and she says his name was Paul Brandon. Well, that's not even his name. His name is Brandon Paul Norris. I mean, who has the last name of Brandon? And, you know, we're like, Paul Brandon, that don't even make any sense. And so Mom calls back again. She's like, I want the full name, please. And that's when we had got the full name. And then the report came in, and CID delivered it to our house, and they would say, hey, let's go through, turn to page 123, for example. It wasn't in our stack. So we know pages are missing. So we're back in the congressman's office. And he reads the report. Well, he questions it himself. And he's like, no, this isn't right. Like, there is so much stuff in here. Like, really bad. And so he said, what do you want done, Miss Block? My mom says, I want to have a meeting with these commanders from Iraq. So he had them pulled in his office. And about 5 days before they were supposed to arrive, he got a phone call, Mr. Kevin Brady. And they said that the captain and the first sergeant wouldn't be attending. And he told my mother that. And my mother, he said, what do you want done, Miss Block? She said, I want them there. I need them to answer some questions. And so I don't know what he did, but he made sure that happened. So we're all in Congressman Brady's office, and all they're talking about, all these commanders are there. They brought one from the Pentagon. Pretty sure he was there for intimidation. He was really big. But, I mean, he wasn't even over there, so he knew nothing. I don't even know why he came. But all they would talk about was their jobs. Like, okay, but we asked this. You're not answering the question. Well, finally, you know, my dad hit the table and he got fed up with it. He just told them to shut up. I mean, all they were talking about was their jobs. And we knew that soldiers were put on gag order, so we knew that nobody would ever talk to us. It was just heard, you know, they were all put on gag order and nobody would talk. So 10 years goes by, and I tell my mom, you know, Mom, just let me take it from here. I mean, it literally was driving her in the ground. I said, just let me see if I can do anything. I don't know. I don't even know where to start. And so I did, and I ended up getting the case reopened, and it ended up being the first ever homicide case to ever be reopened in the Army by DODIG. So it's the first homicide case in the Army to ever be reopened. Why is that? Think about the state. My God. You mean a homicide has never been reinvestigated in the Army ever? What is going on?
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, they had closed it. You know, they did close it, and like always, you know, no new findings because you're investigating yourself. In this case, the commanders are part of the problem because they were reported to move block. Soldiers went in and said, look, you know, people are getting hurt out there. She's got to be moved. Like, you got to do something now. And they would move that soldier instead of my sister or her killer. So when it all happened, they covered it up, and they sent my sister home as friendly fire, 1 shot to the chest, and they sent Norris home as a hero. And there was never no accountability, that they covered my sister's murder up and lied to my family and put my mother and all of us through that.
I am so sorry for your loss and for that of your parents, the rest of your family. These kinds of things just need to stop happening. And the only way we can get them to stop is to shine the light of day on the corruption that's occurring. We need to care.
You know, the families need answers, and I believe that the Supreme Court needs to start hearing every case if we have evidence otherwise. If we have documents and we have soldiers come forward and they say this happened, we need to have a court system set up to it we can go to, and we say, no, this is what happened. And they get held accountable. There's no accountability going on in the military. None.
Yeah, and
the commanding officers.
I know our chief of, our commander-in-chief, President Donald J. Trump, he talks all the time about how he loves our veterans and our military. We really need him to hear your story and those of the other families who have been affected by these situations. And I'm pleading with him right now, directly. President Trump, you need to hold a meeting with these families in the White House, hear their stories, and take some action. We can't delay this any longer. We can't afford to lose one more life of these young men and women who have devoted their lives to serve their country and fight for our liberties and freedom. We need you to respond. Shonta, how is your mother doing these days?
She's sad. She just don't think there's no accountability, that there's just never going to be, And that's all they want is answers and accountability. Tell the truth.
We've had many stories over the years about soldiers who have been murdered. They call it friendly fire, but I'm recalling the professional athlete who chose to serve. He went to war to serve his country because he thought duty was calling him, and he came back home in a wooden box. And that's the first case that really stood out in my mind, and that's been decades ago. And yet it continues on and on. And as Jen has told us, the number's now up to 167, 168 at Fort Hood in the last 4 years. Is that right, Jen?
It's 167 in the last 5 years.
Wow. And that's at one base. Now, if we look at all the bases...
That's one base.
All over the country and around the world, and those who are in combat situations, and they can cover it up so easily because there are bullets flying, and they misidentify these deaths as friendly fire.
Yes, they're labeling them wrong. I mean, look at Lavina Johnson's case. She didn't knock her own teeth down her throat and pour acid in her mouth and other areas, and then shoot herself in the wrong side of the head because they didn't catch that she was left-handed, And it's still labeled as suicide. Congress, they had a congressional hearing themselves. If anything, they could have changed that to unsolved homicide if nobody was going to speak up.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the ideas that I had shared with Jen a couple weeks ago is I think we need to have some kind of an early warning system set up, and we definitely need to have a third-party reporting system when people are in a dangerous situation. I mean, as civilians, we have the right to go to the court 24/7 and seek a order of protection when we're in a domestic violence situation. Our soldiers need the same. They need to have the ability 24/7 to have an outside mechanism in place so that they can ensure their safety. Our soldiers are strong, and as Jen said, badasses, but they're not invincible. And they need someone to have their back, just as we all do. We can't get through life alone. This is a time in our history where it's more important than ever that patriots unite, and we have to pull together and set up mechanisms to fight this fraud and corruption, which is in every aspect of our society today. At times, I think it could be discouraging and overwhelming, but we cannot give up hope. And I don't want you to give up hope at all, Shonta. We will seek justice. And you have many interested people who are coming alongside you, and we will help you fight for that justice that your sister and your family deserves.
Yes, ma'am. And they all deserve it, you know. I mean, there's got to be a court system set up for families like ours. There's got to be accountability and justice somewhere. You can't let a family that gave their only child for this country and turn around and call them a Gold Star family and stomp all over them.
That's right.
Meanwhile, a killer roams free. That's what nobody stops to think about, is that the military is accountable not only to fellow service members, but also to our communities. So if they're not prosecuting what we believe might be a homicide for good reason, because the devil's in the details, then they're letting someone get away with murder. And that person's roaming free to do it again and again and again, because they escalate if not stopped. So nobody.
And then they get let out to a civilian.
Yeah.
And then they get let into the civilian world.
And do, in fact, commit crime. And then later it comes out that they were let go from the military for some reason or another. For example, what they'll do is, oh, well, we don't have evidence for a case, or we're just too lazy, or we don't want to spend the money, so we're just going to kick you out and make you the civilian world's problem with no records. And they've been accused multiple times of making mistakes with their record making. So if it doesn't get in the system that you're someone that shouldn't be buying a gun, you're able to go buy a gun like Devin Kelly and shoot up an entire church at, Sutherland Springs. That's the kind of stuff that keeps happening over and over and over, because they are not taking care of their crime problems. They're minimizing things and protecting the reputation of the institution. That's more important.
And we see this in a lot of areas of our society, and it's really disgusting to me. I remember back in the 80s being on a university campus, working there, and there would be rapes and even murders, and they had their own university police that would handle the situations because they didn't want the bad press. And so they would handle it in-house, and they wouldn't report it to the police in the city. And I think that kind of thing just should not be happening at all. It shouldn't be permitted. And so families on university campuses aren't getting justice. Our soldiers on military bases don't get justice. And now today, civilians in our streets, in our cities, are not getting justice. All these criminals that have been let loose this year, I really wonder what the grand total is of all the people that have been released. Violent criminals, rapists, murderers, drug traffickers. What is going on here? Why are they promoting these people in authority, this tyrannical government that is acting right now? Why are they encouraging violence in the streets? What are they after? I think we all know their agenda. They want to completely destroy us, and we cannot allow it.
The government is not accountable to anyone. We see the same exact issues at the VA that we see in the military. If something goes wrong at the VA, too bad. If your congressperson doesn't respond to you or won't help you, there is no getting help. You're better off trying to work it out internally than you are to try and complain about anything in the federal government. It's just a big bogged down bunch of bureaucratic red tape. And imagine what our families go through trying to get justice through the military. They basically hide behind FOIAs. They tell you to FOIA if you want any kind of information with no timeline, so it could take months or years. Shonta, talk about your FOIA experience.
Okay, so I sent a FOIA because I didn't receive all documents of my sister. I didn't receive a whole CID report when my sister was killed. I have 440 pages exactly because I have copied them out of a 1,200-page supposedly report. So over half is missing. So I FOIA'd that. I FOIA'd medical records, disciplinary records, in case they tried to say, well, she wasn't a good soldier, you know, because that's what usually comes next, is the blame game. So I tried to get all my documents. I sent the FOIAs myself. I did not receive them. The VA, where my father goes, they sent for them. We did not receive them. I went to the congressman, my district congressman, Brian Babin. He was not much help at all. They supposedly had sent for him. I did see the paperwork, but the only thing that ever came back was enlisting papers. Nothing exists after that. And this was years of work. I'm talking about every time you sent one, 2 years. They wait out their time limits to send it to you. Wow. So that was a runaround. And, you know, when you call any kind of agency to help you, all they do is give you another number, another number, another number. It's so bad that I began to start helping families because nobody got this through the government system doing all this. And I kind of had the guidance, you know, along with the help of Jen and several other people. And we, you know, there was one particular case, you know, I told her, I said, hey, is your case being investigated? And this is a Fort Hood case, okay? I won't mention names, but she said yes. And I said, okay, we need to get paperwork on that because they will tell you one thing and that's not even what's happening. I said, you need to call whoever you've been talking to, ma'am. And I said, you need to tell him that you need a paper stating that your daughter's case is open and it is being investigated. They are owed you that paper. So she calls, and she calls me back crying. She said, Shonta, exactly what you said was going to happen, happened. And, you know, it just breaks your heart over again because they do it to the next family. It's a game they play, and they got it down well. And I said, well, what happened, ma'am? She said, I called and asked for the guy that I'm always talking to. And I gave that particular name, and they said they don't know what I'm talking about. He's never worked there. And so on, you know, and it's just heartbreaking because I've heard that story over and dealt with it myself, you know.
They even deny these people exist. Like, that's crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's how the families are dealt with. So they call us Gold Star members and they stomp on us, and that's what I mean by it.
You know how
really sad.
People that are in the social services that are seeking social services, like food stamps or whatever, Medicare, Medicaid, they are given a social worker. They're assigned to someone, and it's that person's responsibility. It seems like maybe we need to have something like that set up for these military families too. The Gold Star families, that they have one specific person who handles their case and helps bring it through the system until they get justice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Maybe some retared veterans, I'm thinking.
Yeah, because I don't think the social workers would really be equipped to handle this, honestly. I've seen some pretty bad mess-ups.
Maybe it's somebody that knows the system, some veterans. I think the veterans are against what's going on right now, to be honest.
Oh, I'm sure they are.
I keep hearing, I didn't see this back then.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you look at it big picture like I have with my website, I didn't see it either. And I thought I was just someone who had bad luck and just happened to be a victim of crime, unfortunately. And then I found out, oh, wait a minute, I'm one of thousands, hundreds of thousands of men and women, both dealing with not just sexual assault, but domestic violence, physical assault, hazing, bullying. It doesn't matter. If it's all of those things are elements of crime, of criminality, and none of them should be minimized because of the detrimental effect that it has on their victims that they can easily isolate because that person can't quit their job. We have to take this seriously because these are life-saving measures that we're not implementing. Because why? Because of red tape and your bureaucracy, you haven't sat down and thought about the fact that, nobody is immune from being, perfect. Like, as if the military is going to be 100% correct on all of their cause of death rulings. Like, they're not accountable for, I'm sorry, but you got this one wrong. So where's the checks and balances in this situation to hold you accountable? Shonta's right. She shouldn't have been the first homicide case that was reopened by the DOD IG. That's crazy that they're just now talking about, reopening one case when we've got all these other cases, including Pat Tillman, who's actually the anniversary of his death is tomorrow.
Wow.
I've studied that entire case inside and out, and those guys, they got so far, and the family did such a great job at getting the information out there. And guess what? It sounds like every other military family that questioned the cause of death, exactly how they felt too. What people don't realize, and what I've noticed in doing this big picture and putting the cases on my website, is I get to study each one and see what all the common themes are. And you nailed it. The Gold Star families need an advocate of some sort to help work them through the system so that they're not being dealt with what feels like a sociopathic response, like these people just don't care that you're traumatized. They need someone that at least treats them with dignity and respect and, cares that they're traumatized if they just lost their loved one and don't really want to be doing this right now. But guess what? No justice, no peace. It's like that with any family. You can't rest until you get justice. And Pat Tillman's family was the same way. And guess what? They got it all the way to Congress and still didn't get answers for that day. So this has been ongoing.
That's right. There's been 2 congressional hearings and no justice on neither one of them.
Same.
Our Congress
can have a third.
They act like a kangaroo court. Congress has not been doing their job. And why haven't we thrown them out on their ear? I don't understand why voters, and actually I think it's not the voters, I think it's just rigged elections are going on. They're keeping the same people in office. These people have not been working for we the people, and we need a fresh start.
And the media isn't either. They're not telling our story, or they cut all the main parts out.
We'll be back in about 6 minutes, and we will be sharing more with you. Feel free to call in at 215-TOP-TALK and ask your questions.